Now, I've thought pretty hard about how to make jokes about Thief players here in Guild Wars 2, and as much as I would like to be like, oh, so you want to be the Assassin's Creed guy, or oh, you want to be Sasuke from Naruto, or something, there's really only 3 Thief players in the entire game. So, for those of you who have a Thief as an alt or intend on RPing as some sneaky boy, here are the best builds for Thief in 2024. Thief is an interesting class because it doesn't really fall into the role of being anybody's first pick at anything, excluding special circumstances. There's some skips with Infiltrator Signet used in speedruns. It has a few different dungeon solo builds that people use that take advantage of stealth, and there is a map comp speedrun quickness Deadeye build, but for the actual structured PVE content, it is really behind most other classes. There are a few good builds that cover various roles that are competitive with other classes, but they definitely aren't in the preferred category. Overall, this class has its roles in PvP and world vs. world roaming, which is where it shines the most. So as I proceed to go over these PvE builds, just know that I am not going to spend the next 10 minutes trashing every build. It should go without saying that other classes perform these roles better in most circumstances. Additionally, I have made some personal changes to some of these builds for ease of use, so for those builds I'll cover the meta way to play them as well as my preferred way to play them. To kick things off, like always, let's start with the power DPS option, which in this case is the power DPS Daredevil. The Daredevil is one of the easiest to use builds in the game. In fact, back when raids were first released, this was my preferred power DPS to clear raids since the Staff Tempest was a little too spicy for me at the time. It is largely the same as it was then, which is awesome. For gear, you are going to run full Berserker's gear with runes of the Dragon Hunter and Relic of the Thief, with your backpack and one accessory being Assassins. This is to get your crit chance around 63%, and a lot of builds run infusions to do this with only one Assassin's piece, but if you run the 2 Assassin's pieces, you'll be alright. You're going to run Staff with Force and Impact Sigils, with Butternut Squash or Sous Vide Steak and Superior Sharpening Stones. The traits are Deadly Arts 133, Critical Strikes 321, and Daredevil 323. Your primary utilities are going to be Hide in the Shadows, Fist Flurry, Assassin Signet, Impairing Daggers, and Thieves Guild. For your elite, you can also take Basilisk Venom if you don't mind sacrificing some DPS. While the official opener uses Axe and Pistol to get a really good burst, I usually forego this for the classic rotation of just spamming Staff 2. The key concept is to use your dodge skill, spam Staff 2 and other skills while the buff Bounding Dodger is active. Impairing Daggers is your free utility skill, so swap that out with whatever else you want. And that is really it. That's how you play this build. It's super high mobility, super easy to play. The Invigorating Precision trait is great for self-sustain for a DPS sacrifice, which is very useful in the open world if you wanted to run this build there. Alternatively, the more complex power DPS option for Thief is the power DPS Deadeye. The power DPS Deadeye runs the same gear as the power Daredevil with full Berserker's gear with Dragon Hunter runes and Relic of the Deadeye with either 1 or 2 pieces of Assassin's gear depending on your reliance on infusions. You're going to run Rifle and Dagger with Force and Impact on both sets. Your traits are going to be Deadly Arts 133, Critical Strikes 321, and Deadeye 131. Your primary utilities are going to be Hide in the Shadows, Assassin Signet, Shadow Gust, Mercy, and Shadow Meld. The build relies on the use of Stealth a lot, which is used to maximize damage through the Stealth skills, Merciless Backstab, and Malicious Death's Judgment. The regular DPS is through the skill 3-round burst, and you can use your cantrips for both stealth and upkeeping Relic of the Deadeye. Assassin Signet does get used, but only during specific boss windows or windows that you want to burst. To play the power DPS Deadeye, you really need an understanding of how stealth mechanics of the Thief work, along with how not to cancel or reveal yourself. The build recommends to unbind Rifle 1 auto attack for this reason, and there are other builds that also recommend doing this. Overall, this build is a good power range DPS option since rifle does have 1500 range. However, it is significantly more complicated than the power DPS Daredevil. This build is an actual thief build, and if you love the aesthetic and mechanics of the thief, you are probably going to want to learn this build even though it is more complex. Moving on to the Condi DPS options, the thief has 3 Condi DPS options, and we will get started with the first of these builds, which is the Condi DPS Spectre. Gone are the days of spamming scepter attacks, as both of these thief builds utilize spear now, since it's both a Condi and power weapon, and the Condi Spectre was subject to this change. The gear is going to be full Viper's gear with runes of the Trapper and Relic of the Fractal. You're going to use Spear with Torment Earth and Scepter and Dagger offhand in case you are forced out of melee range. The food is going to be Cured Meat Flatbread and Master Tuning Crystals. Your traits are going to be Deadly Arts 321, Trickery 323, and Spectre 121, with your utilities being Well of Gloom, Scale Venom, Spider Venom, Prepare 1,000 Needles, and Thieves Guild. And again, you can swap out Thieves Guild for Basilisk Venom if you want. You do sacrifice some DPS. For the most part, this build is really about managing the whole attack chain thing, along with using Venoms and Prepare 1,000 Needles off cooldown. The chain is 2-2-3-1, followed by a 2-2-2, followed by a 4-2-3-1. When entering your Shroud, using skill 2 and skill 4, and that's it. If you want to swap to Scepter because of a mechanic, spamming skill 3, your Twilight combo is the way to go for DPS. But that's pretty much this build. I personally don't really like Spear on any of the builds featuring it, so if you really want to play this, you can still spam Scepter 3, use your Shroud, and keep it pushing. The 4-2-3-1 or the 2-2-3-1 combo relies on stealth because you want to use your stealth attack, which is a pain because 1,000 Needles will reveal you. Additionally, your stealth skill 1 is a channel attack, so it can be cancelled by anything. So you want to disable your autocast on skill 1, and this is a common problem with Spear, as the quickness Deadeye runs into the same problem. An all-around easier to understand build that doesn't really rely on you playing some janky Guitar Hero rotation is the good old reliable Condi Daredevil, which I made a build guide on a while back, so if you want an in-depth guide on this particular build, you should check out that video. I'll put a link in the description. The Condi Daredevil runs full Viper's gear with Runes of the Trapper and Relic of the Fractal. It runs Dagger and Dagger offhand with Agony and Doom, and for food it uses Plate of Kimchi Pancakes and Toxic Focusing Crystals. The traits are Deadly Arts 321, Trickery 113, and Daredevil 121, with your primary utility is going to be Channeled Vigor, Caltrops, Spider Venom, and Prepare 1,000 Needles with Thieves Guild or Basilisk as your elite. Now this build is absolute mwah in terms to play. It is one of my personal favorites in terms of just fun builds. It has its drawbacks, but overall, once you get that flow of dodge, skill 3, auto attack chain, and weaving in your other skills, it feels so rewarding seeing yourself high up on the DPS rankings. You have a ton of evade frames, and it really is just a fun build. You lack any kind of range DPS, and you do have to greed on the boss all the time. There's also a ton of forced movement, but you only really bust this baby out on a handful of bosses, so it's okay overall. I like this build for what it is. Not too many core classes are used in the meta builds these days. However, the Thief has a build that is fairly easy to understand and boasts a pretty high benchmark. It does use Axe, which is notoriously buggy as a weapon, but it might be worth checking out if the other two options aren't your speed. This is the Condi DPS Thief. This build runs full Viper's gear with Runes of the Trapper and Relic of the Fractal. It uses Axe, Dagger, and Dagger Pistol with Bursting and Earth and Doom and Earth on its weapon sets. For food, it runs Kimchi Pancakes and Toxic Focusing Crystals. For traits, it runs Deadly Arts 321, Trickery 213, and Shadow Arts 322, with primary utilities being Hide in the Shadows, Prepare 1,000 Needles, Caltrops, Spider Venom, and Basilisk Venom. The offhand set is only used for break bars with your headshot spam, and the core concept of this build is to spam out your axes and then recall them with your stealth skill. You do this by using Venomous Volley, 2 casts of spinning axes, followed by a stealth skill before recalling the axes with Harrowing Storm. Stealth is granted from Cloak and Dagger, which is your dagger skill 5, and the alternative is your heal skill. Overall, this build is fairly easy to understand. It's just getting the timings right and making sure you don't get revealed by your traps. Most of the utilities you can run off cooldown, and for bosses without break bars, you should run Thieves Guild instead. With that build out of the way, let's move on to the Thieves 2 boon support builds, starting with the Condi Alac Spectre. Like most Condi boon builds, this build runs full Ritualist gear with Runes of the Trapper and Relic of the Fractal. Weapons are Dagger with Agony Doom, and then an offhand dagger with Geomancy for swaps. The food is Kimchi Pancakes and Magnanimous Tuning Crystals. This build can run Scepter Dagger as well, which is an older version that is easier to play, but I'll cover that one in a second. For traits, we are running Deadly Arts 3-2-1, Trickery 3-1-3, and Spectre 1-2-3. With utilities being Well of Gloom, Spider Venom, Caltrops, Prepare Thousand Needles, and Basilisk Venom. This build's damage profile largely follows the Condi Daredevil with Death's Blossom spam. Dipping into your Shroud frequently to blow your skills and provide alacrity, it is not the easiest build to build up Alac with, and you are really going to be in your Shroud every time it's available and spending a decent amount of time in your Shroud. An easier way to play this build that gives it some additional range is through the use of Scepter Dagger, which is the original way this build functioned. It is basically going to be spamming Twilight combo for all of your initiative, and I personally like the Scepter build on this more than Daggers just because of the added support that it gives when you target your allies. In comparison to some other Alac providers, this one is pretty low on the list. I think it is fun to play, but it needs to either get more utility or more damage to really stand out. Right now, it kind of just does the job mediocrely if played well and horribly if played poorly. Moving on to the other boon provider for the Thief, we have the Power Quickness Deadeye. And for this build, the recommended items are pretty unfun to play with in my opinion. However, I will tell you an alternative way that makes this build easier. This build is going to follow the same armor as the Power Daredevil and Power Deadeye with Berserkers and Assassin's gear with Runes of the Dragon Hunter and Relic of the Deadeye. The proposed weapon is Spear with Force and Impact and offhand Dagger and Pistol for break bars. Food is going to be Sous Vide Steak and Superior Sharpening Stones. And the traits are going to be Deadly Arts 1-3-3, Critical Strikes 3-2-1, and Deadeye 3-3-3, with primary utilities being Malicious Restoration, Assassin's Signet, Mercy, Shadow Flare, and Shadow Meld. The way this build works is that when you use your F1, which is Deadeye's mark, you will always get Steal Time, which applies quickness. You want to use this off cooldown, and you want to use Mercy to reset it occasionally. Your heal skill, Shadow Meld, and Shadow Flare all grant you a steal skill, which is Steal Time, and you use these cantrips to upkeep your Deadeye relic while also providing your boons. The rotation for Spear is pretty garbage. The chain combo relies on the stealth finisher from your skill 3 and channeling your skill 1, which is annoying. I played with Spear through Janther Wilds, and frankly, it's not my favorite weapon. It is recommended that you unbind your auto attack because any skill can cancel the channel and it just tanks your DPS. Because of this, I forego the Spear in place of Staff with Force Impact, and you just go back to the old reliable skill 2 spam of the Daredevil, and you will get more reliable DPS this way if you don't want to learn the nuances of the Spear. And frankly, I don't recommend you do either. It's not worth it. I will give an honorable mention here to the Condi Quickness Deadeye, which has the exact same problems. The Spear rotation is annoying, there's no range DPS option, and it's generally not as good as other options available. Nobody is going to pick a Condi Quickness Deadeye over a Condi Quickness Herald, so I would be wasting time nailing down this build and recommending it to you guys. And finally, we get to the heal option for the Thief, which is one of the forgotten, least talked about healers in the entire game, and while it is viable, it almost gets no play outside of very specific strategies. This build follows most heal builds with full Harriers or Minstrels with Runes of the Monk and Relic of Caracosa. It runs Scepter Pistol with Concentration and Transference, with standard heal food of fruit salad or rice balls with bountiful maintenance oil. The traits are Shadow Arts 111, Trickery 311, and Spectre 333, with primary utilities being Well of Gloom, Well of Bounty, Well of Silence, Blinding Powder, and Shadowfall. This healer relies on ally targeting, which means you will be shifting between an ally and an enemy to provide boons and healing. The Spectre's auto attack does a good amount of barrier generation, stealth gives boons to your allies, wells give boons to your allies, and your Shroud is a good source of blast finishers, which is for boons and healing for your relic. This healer heavily relies on you being able to track and target your allies alongside doing boss mechanics. Pistol Offhand is your primary source for CC, and frankly, this build is really fun and a unique healer. It is way more challenging to do than any of the other healers, but here we are. And that is the main issue, is the challenge associated with the Heal Spectre. I think that it needs to be able to either do more, and then you run into a problem with all the sweats just abusing it. It's not in a very good place. There are a few other builds that exist for the Thief that fulfill specific purposes like kiting on Kadim 1, solo lamp on the same fight, and also speedrunning Corteria. And even though its place in the meta isn't the best right now, it is still a good class. More so, it's a very unique class, and it is harder to master than some of the alternatives. I'm not going to cover all of these builds here, but they do exist and they are worth checking out if you are a Thief player. And with that, I want to thank you for watching. A special thanks to all of my subscribers, and if you dig the content, please consider subscribing. Thanks again, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.